Rabbi Silber, are you ready to start?
I am. It's 5 o'clock, right? I mean,
Yep.
It's 10 o'clock your time.
Yeah, depending on the
let's
time
begin.
zones. Great.
Depending where you are.
I just want to welcome everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on your time zone. Welcome to our fourth session of our journey through Genesis, Joseph and Jacob, with Rabbi David Silber. Just to explain some of our Zoom etiquette, I will invite you to become a panelist as you join the Zoom. You can choose to accept that, and that just means that you can turn your camera on so we can see you if you wish. And it also means that when Rabbi Silber invites comments or questions, you will be able to unmute yourself and ask them yourself. When you're not speaking, we just ask you to stay on mute so that we don't get background noise and we can all hear each other. If you forget, don't worry, I will mute you. If you want to speak, you can use the putting your hand up function on Zoom when we have questions. It's in the little button that says reactions. Or you are very welcome to put your questions or your comments in the Zoom chat. And if you're joining us on Facebook Live, then you can put your comments and questions as a comment on the video and I will bring them to the Zoom. I will be following along with Rabbi Silber on Safaria, so you can see the sources there, but of course you're very welcomed and encouraged to follow along in your own Tanakh. Over to Rabbi Silber. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Okay, so we're up to chapter 44. At the end of 43, the brothers have come back to Egypt, and they're actually invited into the house of Yosef himself, and that actually concerns them. But they are reassured by the fellow in charge of the house, Beit Yosef as it's called, that everything's fine, and that the money that they say they found in their sacks must be a gift from heaven, and everything is good, and they eat with Yosef. And at the end of the chapter, the previous chapter, we're told that when the brothers eat with Yosef, two interesting things. First of all, the Egyptians eat separate from Yosef and the brothers eat separately from Yosef and the Egyptians. So in other words, Yosef eats with nobody, and nobody would eat with Yosef. The Mitzrayim won't eat because he's an Ivri, and the Ivrim don't eat with the viceroy of Egypt. That's one interesting feature. In the last verse of chapter 43, it says that portions were served by Yisam Asot Mi'et Panav, the 34th verse, the last verse of chapter 43. Before that, the verse before Yeshua Panav, here, Kitsi Rato. So when they sit at the table, they are seated, and they're seated in the order of birth. And the men were amazed that how could he know this? Remember that all the brothers were born within 7 years, so there's very little difference in age between them, and somehow this viceroy of Egypt is able to seat them in the correct order. And that's quite amazing. Now, why does Joseph in fact do this? What is his motive? In the case of Yosef, he clearly has plans. So we are entitled, in the case of Yosef, to always search for a motive. In this case, the motive seems quite clear from what follows, namely that Yosef wants to tell them that fundamentally he has ability to find out truths that other people cannot know. In point of fact, actually, that is true of the Joseph story in general. It's a story about somebody who has access to secret knowledge. He gets his secret knowledge through dreams, and he also is able to interpret the dreams of others. So he's a person who has access to secrets. But in this particular case, with seeing them in the size order or age order in his house, he's actually setting up something else. Because what he's setting up, what he's about to do in chapter 44, is to place a silver goblet into the sacks of one of the brothers. And the silver goblet, which will be placed in the sack of one of the brothers, is not to be confused with the kesef that is returned. The gavia, the goblet, in chapter 44, which the Yosef used them stealing, that goblet is made out of silver. Where's that verse? Let's see. It's found later in. Oh, here it is, right at the beginning of chapter 44, actually. 2. It's verse 1 and 2. Let's read verse 1. Verse 1 is Vayitzav et asher beito lemar malei et amtachos hanashim ochel kasher yuchun seit, fill up their sacks with food as much as they can carry. V'sim kesef ish b'fi amtachto, and put the money of each one, the kesef, literally silver. You say money or silver, translated silver. Put their silver back in the bags. But the silver goblet, tasim b'fiyam tachat hakoton v'yet kesef shivro. To the youngest one, put my silver goblet, and also the money that he paid for the food, kesef shivro. Shever is the food that you buy. So the gavia hakesef, in other words, the claim will be, and later on it's explicit, that's not any ordinary goblet. It's a divining goblet. And in order to make this point stronger, what he does is he seats them at the table, and presumably the goblet, right, that he drinks from, it's a drinking goblet, obviously, probably sitting on the table. And the claim that will be made later is that this is the goblet that he uses to divine. So you didn't just take kesef. The kesef is returned to all the brothers, including the youngest, and the kesef was returned last time, but this is not the same thing. This is the goblet of silver. And the goblet of silver, later on will explicitly, he'll tell them explicitly, this is what he uses to divine. Before we jump into this matter, in 1 second we will, I just wanted to go back to the very last verse, verse 34 of the previous chapter. So first he sees them in this correct order, and they're all amazed. And in the last verse, Vayisam masot be'et panav aleihem. So he serves, masot here probably means a portion, a serving. He brings servings to them. Vaterev masat binyamin mi masot kulam chamesh yadot. But he gives Binyamin, the youngest brother, his own full brother from his mother, he gives him 5 times the portions, or maybe it's gifts, it's hard to know, 5 times, chamesh yadot, 5 times as many as the others, vayishtu, vayishkuru imo, and they drank, and they were intoxicated together with him. So these verses over, he's invited to the house, he has a festive meal, special meal, he prepared special food for them. Tevoach tevach v'achein, prepare meat for them. They eat meat, the Hebrews. But what has Joseph done at the end of chapter 43? So first of all, he has told them by way of the seating arrangement that he has special powers of discernment. He can know things other people don't know. It's a magical way of knowing. Number 2, that for whatever reason, he favors the youngest child. He gives the youngest child 5 times as much, chamesh yadot, 5 times as much as the other brothers. I'll come back to that in 1 minute. And thirdly, he gives them to drink when they become somewhat intoxicated. And when you become somewhat intoxicated in the book of Bereshit, and in life too, your thinking is not as clear. You can be easily fooled or tricked. So what Joseph seems to be setting up over here, given what follows, he's setting up the opportunity to somehow trick his brothers, to fool his brothers, to manipulate, as he seemingly has done. The question is, to what purpose? So
Rabbi
let me just
Silber, sorry, could
yes.
I interrupt for a second? Would it be possible to just adjust your camera slightly so we can see your full face? It's easier to hear for people who aren't here so well. Thank you.
I can't see my own face, so I don't know why that is.
Okay, just bring it down a little bit if you're on a laptop. If you're on a laptop, then bring it slightly that we can see your. I think we can see you now. Yeah.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, fine, good. All right. So in any event,
Thank
okay. So in any event, let's start with this giving Benjamin 5 times the amount of the others. There are 2 observations I have to make about this giving him 5 times the others. One is that the number 5 is a number that runs through the Joseph narrative. We'll come across the number 5 many times. Joseph will say to his brother, there are 5 more years of famine. There are later on when he apportions the land, the priests get one out of 5, 1/5, 4 portions, and the 5th portion goes to the priests. When Joseph will send delegates to Paro to speak for the brothers, he takes 5 brothers. When Israel leaves Egypt, chamushim, whatever chamushim means, armed or having things they need for the journey, chamushim. So the word chamesh, it is curious, appears many times in the Joseph narrative. And this is another example. He gives Benjamin 5 times. I'll make a suggestion later, not today necessarily, about why the number 5 is a number that appears in the story of Joseph. But the other thing that's interesting about this, the number 5 in this particular situation, they wrote this, they're eating together. The brothers are actually eating with Joseph. They don't know it's Joseph, but they're actually eating with Joseph. When you eat together, often it forms a kind of bond. We have that in other places of the Torah. So over here, it's interesting that if you consider that if everybody gets 1 portion and Benjamin gets 5 portions, so assuming that Joseph has 1 portion, that means that Joseph and Benjamin have 6 portions and the brothers have 6 portions. There are, the sons of Leah, I would say, have 6 portions. So there's perhaps some kind of statement being made over here about Rachel and Leah being somehow on the same, having the same significance with the family. I don't know. Come back to that. But number 5 is a number that runs through the story, and it's quite interesting. In any event, what is Joseph doing over here? Number 1, he's telling them, in effect, he has special powers. Number 2, by giving Benjamin more portions than anybody else, he's suggesting that somehow Benjamin is the favorite in Joseph's eyes. And we know that Benjamin was the favorite in Yaakov's eyes because all the brothers were sent down to Egypt to get food except for Benjamin. For Jacob had said, Pen yikra'enu ason, lest misfortune overtake him. Well, if the road is dangerous, it's as dangerous for all the other brothers as it is for Binyamin. It's true he's the youngest, but he's probably 1 or 2 years younger than the others. So the fact of the matter is that what Joseph is doing, in other words, if in fact what Joseph is doing, setting up test or setting a situation in which Binyamin effectively is in the same place as Yosef, this would be a good thing to do. And if he's out to trick them, to deceive them, getting them a little tipsy doesn't hurt either. So here we have, on one hand, it's a very pleasant meal. They're all sitting together, but the last 2 verses, he sees them in a certain way, which is very surprising. He favors one of them, who already probably is favored, and he lowers their ability to think clearly. That's what you have at the end of chapter 43. The question is always why? What is his strategy? What is his goal, actually, more than strategy? What does he want to do? And now he instructs the man in charge of his house in the first 2 psukim to return their money once again, the kesef. But as far as the youngest one is concerned, he says, give him back his kesef and also put inside his sack this gavia, the silver goblet. I'll just want to say one or 2 things, and I'll stop and take some comments. But here there's an interesting question about returning their money once again. In other words, the first time the money was returned, and they were worried about that. Why is the money in our sacks? They came back to the house of Joseph, and the fellow in charge said, God gave you a gift. But obviously, when they found the money, they were very concerned, and Yaakov was concerned. Come back with all this money. Where's the money from? And your brother's missing. So Yaakov's suspicious. Something bad happened. Question over here is, once again, is Joseph returning their money with their knowledge or without their knowledge? The Ramban argues here that in this particular case, they know the money is being returned. That's what the Ramban suggests. He says this time, he just says to them, maybe I caused all the trouble, this and that. You can take the food for nothing. Here's it. Take your money back. That's what the Ramban thinks. The truth of the matter is that one could argue quite the opposite, that once again, Joseph has placed the money unbeknownst to them inside their sacks. And now the question is, of course, the question is always why he does that. Why does he return their money? In the past, we suggested two possibilities. One is to set up a test to create suspicion. And the other is they're his brothers. Why would you take money for you? They're hungry, you give them food, you don't charge them money. So that's always a possibility. Over here, there's a big difference, I think, if they know or don't know. Because if they don't know, then and they see the money in their sacks, then they have to, and then they find the goblet in Benjamin's sack. If that's the story, then they would suspect that the same way they know they didn't take any money, so probably Binyamin didn't take the goblet either. That's one possibility. The question is, though, do they actually know that the money is in their sacks? Because if you look later on in the chapter, after Joseph sends his fellow out to catch up with them, and he says to them, you did a terrible thing. Joseph instructs him to say to them in verse number 4, why did you repay me with evil for all the good I did? You took the goblet of my master, says this fellow. And he divines with it. Verse number 5, you did a terrible thing. And the brothers answer. In verse number 7, they give a response. They say in verse 7, why do you accuse us of these things? God forbid that your servants should do such a thing. And then they say in verse number 8, they say, of course we didn't, none of us stole the silver goblet. Because hey, kesef asher matzanu b'fi am techotenu hashivonu eilecha me'eretz Canaan. Look, the money we found in our sacks, we brought back. How then can you accuse us of stealing silver or gold from the master's house? If we even went back to return the money, how much more so is it obvious we would not steal anything? Now, if we just look what happens, so what happens is, then the fellow says, okay, and in verse number 11, we'll come back to those verses, but in verse 11, it says, Vayimaharu, each one hurried up, Vayoridu ishadam tachto arza, they put their sacks on the ground, Vayiftechu isham tachto, and they opened up the sacks, and then in verse number 12, Vayichapes, he searched. He started with the oldest and then down to the youngest, the same way Joseph had seated them at the table. And the goblet was found in Binyamin's sack. So first of all, they open up the sacks. They say, we wouldn't steal a goblet. We even returned the money. How could we be accused of stealing a goblet? Okay, so and then they say, whoever took it should die. We'll be slaves also. So the servant says, no, whoever will be a slave, and the rest of you can go home. You're innocent. They hurried and took down the sacks on the ground, opened them up. But then in verse number 12, we switch from the plural of Vayimaharu, Vayoridu, which is plural, Vayiftechu, which is plural, to the singular, Vayichapes. He searched. And he found it. So it's not clear to me, actually. In other words, the question is, did they know that the money was returned or not? The Rabban thinks yes. Truth be told, I don't really see that in the text, but that's the Ramban suggestion. But the point is, then if they don't know, then perhaps if they find the money in their sacks, they would know that Binyamin's being framed, or suspect Binyamin's being framed possibly. But it's not clear that they actually know the money's in the sacks, because they take the sacks down, but the searching of the sacks is not done by them. The searching in verse number 12 is done in the singular by this fellow that chases after, by Chapes. He searches and he finds the Gavia in the sack of Benjamin. Okay, let me stop here for a moment. We'll come back to this in a minute. But if there are any comments or questions, I will take them now.
We have a question from Jennifer in the chat. I can read it out.
Go ahead.
Okay. What are the parallels between Joseph eating alone and brothers eating a meal while Joseph is in the pit? Is there a parallel between the silver in Benjamin's bag and the silver received for selling Joseph?
I would say certainly yes in both cases. Those are two very excellent points. For sure, I would say that the idea of, yes, the brothers, Joseph was in the pit, they're eating their meal content, and he's in the pit, and we later discover he was crying to them from the pit for help, and they didn't help him. And now, once again, one might say the tables are turned. Again, once again, depending on how you see Joseph's behavior. But certainly, here it's all nice and good and wonderful, but at the very time they're eating together, one can see Joseph as plotting. Now, what exactly he's plotting? Clearly, he's plotting to frame Benjamin. The question is why? That's clear. He specifically orders that the goblet be placed in Benjamin's sack. So for whatever reason, we'll come back to this, because there are two good possibilities of why he's doing it, but certainly he's plotting to do it. So one, I think, can once again connect this story, as we've connected other stories, to the initial sale of Joseph, or actually initial attempted murder of Joseph is what it is. And one can see it as payback, justice, however you, revenge. You can read it in a variety of ways. Mm-hmm. So that's as far as the kesef is concerned. That is very interesting about the kesef, especially if you assume that the kesef is setting up. In fact, it sets up a very difficult situation. They come home with the kesef, and Yaakov suspects that something's wrong. Maybe even suspects they sold their brother. So yes, I would say that Joseph's story is very complicated, but I think that certainly there is, however you see Joseph's motive, it could be revenge, it could be justice, it could be getting them to consider their ways, it could be many things. But the connection is a good connection, strong connection. I think that's important. Is there any other comment now?
Yes, Jennifer.
Oh,
and
I
then
just
Wendy.
Thank you, Rabbi Silber. I just had thank you for that. Such a generous explanation. Hey, one other question. I wondered, here you have the brothers going to sell Joseph, the whole thing at the beginning, and then now at the point in this story they're so concerned that they be accused of stealing this money. Is that to say that really they're only, that they were basically good people from the beginning? It was just this jealousy of Joseph that made them commit such a terrible act, or do you see varying degrees of morality between each of the brothers is different? The two that want to save Joseph in the beginning, and then more or less, I just didn't know how you interpreted this concern now about the money and the elevation of their moral status through the story.
Well, right. I mean, it's complicated. I think over here, though, the Chumash is going out of its way. No one is singled out. I'll come back. It's the brothers collectively. There's no difference between the brothers. I mean, yes, Judah will speak up at the end of the chapter, or the end of this section. Yehuda will speak up, and he suddenly becomes the spokesperson for the whole group. But the point is that it's all the brothers, Joseph and his brothers, and it's all the brothers. And here we come to actually a very important point about the story. You see, the point is whether they know that the money is returned or not. Personally, I don't see it as they know it's returned yet. He's returning their money in this case, because he's going to, if Joseph's plan works, Benjamin will be taken as a slave to Joseph, and all the other brothers will go home. Then they get home money. Yes, maybe you suspect they sold Benjamin. That's possible. On the other hand, buy and here's the money back. I didn't charge you for the food. But the point over here, yes, it's true that the word kesef appears in terms of the money, but in terms of kesef ish b'fiyam tachto, but you also have the goblet. It just turns out that the goblet is also kesef. We had gviya hakesef tosi b'fiyam tachat hakvaton. We had kesef shivro. But here, I think what the Chumash is doing, on one hand, it's equating the kesef, which makes sense if they know actually, if they know in fact that the money was in their sacks, they know they didn't take it. They would presume that Binyamin did not steal the goblet either. But what we have to point out over here is that there's a difference between the kesef, the money on one hand, and the goblet on the other. And here we come to a very important point about the story, which is this. Joseph is framing his brothers. And when someone knows you very well, this is the point. When someone knows you, they're very dangerous because they know exactly your history, they know your weaknesses, the vulnerabilities. The point over here, the brother said, stealing something, steal something. We actually return the money. If we return the money, will we actually take money? That's what it's kind of a kal v'chomer, you know? However, the kal v'chomer has two problems. First of all, the person with whom the goblet is found never returned any money because he was never there in the first place. Binyamin didn't return anything. Binyamin wasn't there. So that statement, if we return the money, would we steal, wouldn't apply to Benjamin, who never returned the money because he never was in Egypt. So it wouldn't apply to him. But that's one point. But the more important point is there's another point over here. There's a difference between the kesef and the gviya hakesef. The kesef is money, but the gviya hakesef is not about money. It's about stealing some kind of magical object, an object that gives you certain understanding, or certain insight, or certain knowledge that others don't have. And here the important point is that specifically Benjamin is the one he's going to set up this way, because we have a parallel story in the Torah. This is chapter 44. But we all remember chapter 31, that when Yaakov is running away from Lavan, back in chapter 31, Rachel, Yaakov steals the heart of Lavan by telling him he's leaving. That's chapter 31. But we're told in the very next verse in chapter 31, Rachel anvat hatrafim, that Rachel stole the trafim, idols, some kind of idols of her father. Hatrafim asher aviyah. This is found in chapter 31, verse number, let's find this, verse number 19 and verse number 20. So no, Vatignov Rachel et hatrafim asher aviyah, Rachel the trafim. Vayignov Yaakov and Lavan Arami, and Jacob stole the heart of Lavan. He didn't tell him he was running away. So the point of stealing the trafim, it's not just stealing money or taking money. Jacob got rich by manipulating Lavan's flocks, but that's not the trafim business. The trafim, Lavan says it, why did you steal my gods? The trafim are the gods of Lavan, the gods of the Aramean Lavan. So Jacob, upon fleeing Lavan's house, fleeing Aram, and going back to his own land, somebody in his family has taken the special sacred object of that culture. And now we have the parallel in our story. The brothers are going home, and suddenly somebody overtakes the brothers. And the fellow says to them, why did you make good with evil? What is this? This is what my man, it's a magical goblet. It's a special goblet of the house of my master, of the viceroy of Egypt. So the accusation here is not about stealing, actually. The accusation is leaving the land and taking the magical object one might even call it a kind of idolatrous object from the culture which you are leaving. So therefore, the Medrash, of course, sees this right away. Medrash has the brothers saying to Benjamin, Ganva bar Ganvita, you are a thief, the son of a female thief. You're Rachel's child, because Rachel did exactly the same thing. Rachel stole the Trafim. So yes, even if we assume that the statement of the brothers is true, look, if we return money, are we going to take money? But of course, the answer to that is twofold. A, Benjamin didn't return anything, but B, it's not about the money. It's not about the kesef. It's about the Gavia kesef. It's about Ashegin Acheshbo. It's a divining cup. That Benjamin could be accused of because his mother does exactly that. We have these parallel stories. Leaving the culture, someone overtakes you, and then the accusation. In each case, one of Lavan's accusations was by gods, Rachel the Trafim, and in the case of Binyamin, Rachel's son, the accusation is you stole the divining object of my Lord. Of course, Joseph knows this, you see. Joseph knows the family. So therefore, those people are dangerous. They know all your weaknesses. They know all your vulnerabilities. And actually, it puts the brothers, it's interesting, it puts the brothers in a funny situation because he might actually be guilty. What will the brothers' response be? Now, assuming if they know that money's in their sacks, they know they didn't take that. Assuming they know, which is unclear. But in any event, it's not clear. But how will the brothers respond to the fact that this magical goblet is found in Binyamin's sack? Okay, so before I move further, there are a couple of comments or questions. Yes,
one
please.
more parallel. Excuse me. One more parallel is the brothers saying, whoever, if you find it, that person will die, and that's what Jacob said.
Yes,
So
I will get to that. I will
so
get to
they
that in
are
1 minute.
inadvertently putting Benjamin's life at risk, like Jacob did of Rachel.
I agree with partially with what you said, and I disagree with partially. I'll get to that's the next. I'll deal with it in 60 seconds. Hold that. It's a very good point. Yes, of course, it is parallel.
I think Wendy had a question.
Anybody else? Yes.
Wendy, would you like to unmute and ask your question? Okay, maybe next time. I think someone else had their hand up as well. I think Zella.
Yes. I'm not hearing anything.
No. Okay. I think some people had their hands up, but maybe they don't want to ask their question right now.
I'm on now.
Oh,
okay.
There we go.
I've never understood why Yosef is so preferring his little brother Benjamin, because Benjamin killed his mother.
Benjamin didn't kill his mother. I mean,
The
yes.
birth of Benjamin, she died in childbirth.
That's true. No, she did. That's right.
That we may all know or think that, well, it could have been because she had stolen the trophy.
Right.
But, and so in a sense, by Jacob killed her because he put that curse on whoever stole the trophy. But to the big brother, his little brother took mommy away in spades.
Okay, look, he doesn't blame
And
Benjamin, obviously.
And now I'm wondering if this sets up to kind of torturing Benjamin by giving him the cup.
Okay, I will respond to that in a second. Let me just start with the first point, and it's all connected. The point is that the response of Yaakov, as both of you have noted, the response of Yaakov when Lavan accuses him of stealing the Trafim is, whoever took them should die. That's what Yaakov says. Whoever took them should die. You can go search, he says. Whoever took them should die. That was Yaakov's response. In point of fact, Rachel has stolen them. So he did curse her. That's what Yaakov says. But over here, actually, when the man accuses them of stealing the goblet, the brothers say something different. It's not the same. The brothers say to the fellow, they say, whoever took it from amongst your servants should die. That is the same. However, they don't stop talking. And we also will be slaves. So that's the difference between the two. When it comes to Yaakov, who's the head of the family, Yaakov did not say to Lavan, listen, if anybody took the trophy, they should die. And you can also hold me responsible as the head of the family. That's what Yaakov did not say. But when it comes to the brothers over here, they do say that. They say, okay, the one who took it is more severe because that brother stole it. But we are also guilty because we're a family. We're all connected. So we'll also be slaves. The fellow says to them, no. In verse number 10, the fellow says, okay, what you say is good. However, let's modify it. Whoever's stolen will be my slave, and the rest of you are innocent. Now, here's the very important point about the story. What you see over here is that at this point, unlike Yaakov doesn't, it's a problem with Yaakov. He didn't say, I'm also responsible, which he probably should have said because he's the head of the family. But in this particular case, the brothers are taking collective responsibility to a large degree. They're saying we'll be slaves. We're all guilty in some sense. The fellow says back to him, no one's going to die. Whoever took it will be a slave, and the rest of you are innocent, and you can go home, presumably, etc. So that's a very important point in the story. We saw this even earlier when they found the money in the sack of one of them on the way back. The one fellow opened up his sack by Derech Bamalon, and he finds the money. And the brothers say, Mazot osa Elohim lanu, what has God done to us plural. They don't say, what did you do? They say, what has God done to us? That's as far as the first point is concerned. Now, as far as the second point is concerned, about why Joseph might be doing this, I say might. It's not 100% clear, but what strikes me is actually the opposite of what Wendy's suggesting, which is that I think what Joseph may be doing over here, he might be testing the brothers, but it's also another possibility, which is the point of Binyamin in the story is Binyamin stands in for Joseph. Binyamin is the youngest one, the son of Rachel, whom Yaakov favors. And Joseph might think, and might have good reason to believe, that Binyamin is in danger. Because Joseph knows his own story. My father favored me, gave me this special coat, etc., set me off, and I never came back. They wanted to kill me. They end up either selling me or causing my sale. So I'm going to liberate my brother from a misguided father and from dangerous brothers. So I'll frame him. I'll send them all away. I'll take Benjamin as my so-called slave. And when he comes to me, after 10 minutes, when they're gone, I'll tell him who I am. He's already favored Benjamin by giving him 5 times the portions of anybody else. It's clear that Yosef has a very special relationship to Binyamin, clear later on also. So one very strong possibility in the story is that he, in fact, is out to save Benjamin. That's really a good possibility in the story. It's one of these stories where we can't know for certain, but certainly a viable reading of it is exactly this. Now, is Joseph testing them or not is a good question, but whether Joseph is actually testing them or not is not related to a different question, which is, are in fact they being tested? Which is yes, there is a test, and you see right away that they don't simply say, they don't simply say whoever took it is guilty and not us. And then when they find it, they find the Gavia in Benjamin's sack. And as I pointed out, we have reason to believe he might actually have done it. It's what his mother did. Says Vayikru Simlotam, they all tore up their garments. It's a sign of sadness, a sign of mourning. Vayamos Isha Chamoro, Vayashuvu Ira, and they come back to the city. That's the first 13 verses. And is what the responsibility of the brothers could have said, okay, listen, you said we can all go home. We didn't do it. We don't take idolatrous stuff. Benjamin, he's another story. He's like his mother. What can we do about it? But that's not what they're going to say. They're going to say something very different. Which is why this is one of the great moments in the Joseph story. These verses, beginning in verse 14 and up to the end of this section, which ends in verse 17, is one point. And then beginning in verse 18, we have the great speech of Judah that will take a fair amount of time. But let's at least begin now with verse number 14. So now in verse number 14, Vayavo Yehuda v'Yechav Beita Yosef. It begins, verse 14 begins, Judah and his brothers came to the house of Joseph. So the first thing we notice is that the Torah has singled out Judah over here. Up to that, we talked about the brothers. Now, Judah and the brothers came back. So what the Chumash is setting up is that Judah will play a central role from this point on. And we also know why Judah will play a central role, because it was Judah who said to his father, give the boy to me, I will bring him back. I take responsibility. If I don't bring him back, I will be a sinner all of my days. So the crisis now of Benjamin and the family is on everybody, but it's particularly on Yehuda. He's the one who made the promise. So the Torah already sets it up. It doesn't say Vayavo Yosef. It says Vayavo Yehuda v'Yechav Beit Yosef. Typical device of the Chumash. Judah and the brothers came to Joseph's house. V'hu odenu sham. Joseph was still there. The meal was over, but Joseph was still waiting in the house. And we'll comment about this another time. And then all the brothers fall down before Joseph. What is it you have done? Don't you know that a man like me practices divination? Now that could have two different meanings, by the way, two very different meanings. One is, how could you do such a thing and take away my magical goblet? Don't you know how dear that goblet is to me? Don't you know that I use the goblet to divine? In fact, I even used it at the meal we just had to seat you in the right order. That's one possibility. That Hawaii.10 means, how could you do this thing? It's not just taking away any old object. It's an object of great significance, importance to me. There are certain objects that just their value on the market, they have a sentimental value, they have an emotional connection, etc. And for practical use, that's one possibility. Then there's another possibility, which is, what's this thing that you did? Do you believe you could get away with it? Don't you know that a man like me practices divination? Don't you know that a man like me knows things that other people don't know? That I know all kinds of secrets? How could you do this? You think you're going to get away with it? That's another possibility. Those are two different interpretations of the verse. In any event, it's kind of rhetorical question, which is always a critical question. It's a criticism. But I want to come back to a different point, very important point about verse number 15. What is this deed that you have done? Because that expression, what is the deed that you have done, is one, and in our studies we ran across this many times. This is an expression that runs through the entire book of Bereshit, beginning in Gan Eden. And God said to the woman, Me'osit. And Pharaoh said to Abraham, Me'osita. And Avimelech said to Abraham, Me'osita. And Avimelech said to Abraham a second time, Me'osita. To Yitzchak, Me'osita. And over here, Me'osita. And each time, and God says to Yaakov when he's running away, Me'osita. In the section we just accessed, we just read. What did you do? Why did you run away? Why did you not give me a chance to kiss my daughters goodbye? Why did you steal away? And why did you steal my gods? And in each case, the person who answers that question, Me'osita, each case is different, but there's no perfect response in any case. The best of the bunch is probably Yitzchak, which is the truth. I was afraid you'd kill me. Okay. That's a pretty good answer. But here, what's interesting over here is there is no excuse. In all the other cases, the person gives some kind of teretz, some kind of excuse. Often a good one. But in this case, Judah's response, which was completely different. And Judah said, what can we say to our Lord? What words can we say? How can we justify ourselves? From the word tzedek. It's what Judah said about Tamar. She's more righteous than I. What does Judah say? There are no words. there's nothing that I can say to you to justify it. God has found out our sin. Hinenu avodim ladoni. We shall be slaves to my Lord. Kamanachnu. Kamasher nimsa agavia biado. And the one with whom is found the goblet. We have to think about this verse. It's one of the critical verses in the book, actually. Because in point of fact, actually, Judah probably suspects that Benjamin did not steal the goblet. Certainly, if they know of the money in their own sacks, if they know, it's not clear, but if they know that, and they certainly know they didn't take the money, the kesef, so they probably presume that Benjamin did also not steal the Gavia HaKesef, although there is a difference, as I pointed out. But the point is, he makes no excuses. Every other person in this book has a teretz. The snake made me do it. Nachash made me do it. I was afraid. Whatever. Each one has a teretz. I did steal away, but I thought you wouldn't let me leave, etc. But Judah has more answers. And the point about Judah having no answers is he probably has a very good answer. Let me tell you something. I don't know. I don't think he actually took it. But what can I say? I think we're innocent. But that's not what Judah says. There's no way for us to see. I'm not suggesting we are innocent. He says that God has uncovered the crime of your servants. Now, what crime is he talking about? Of your servants. Notice the plural. It's not about Benjamin. It's all of us. We are all guilty, and also the guy with whom the goblet has been found. So we are all guilty. Forget the guy with whom it's been found, he says, not who took it, with whom it's been nimtza hagavia biyado. So I presume the crime he's talking about is not stealing money or goblets. The goblet I don't know about, but in terms of the everything else, he says we are guilty, but not of what you're accusing us of. We're guilty of a different crime, a different kind of theft, one might say, selling our brother or causing him to be sold. So he confesses to a crime. That's very powerful because you could give answers. Sometimes someone accuses of something, they have the facts wrong, but actually they're right. I know someone like this. Every time she says something, her facts are always wrong, and 99% of the time, what she says is true. I can't explain it, but that's the case over here. It is true. We are guilty, but not of that crime. But God knows the truth, and therefore we are all guilty. We are all guilty. All of us. We're all in the same boat. Not what Jacob had said, whoever took it should die. We're all equally guilty. The brothers earlier had said the one who took it should die and will be slaves. That is assuming responsibility, but not full responsibility. Yehuda says something different. We're all the same. We're all going to be slaves. This guy who took it, because that's what the fellow said earlier, he'll be a slave, you'll go free. No one's going free. We're all slaves. And now Joseph responds. And I'll stop and take comments. In verse 17, Joseph responds. Says Joseph, God forbid, I would never do such a thing. Far be it from me. Only the one with whom the cup has been found, he'll be my slave. He'll be my slave. And you can go back in peace to your father. So I'll stop at this point before I take comments. This will lead us to one of the great speeches of Sefer Bereshit, which is Judah's speech to Joseph. I just want to, before we get to Judah's speech to Joseph, Judah's speech is an extremely interesting speech, and we'll see it. But if you're Judah, I'll just say one point about what you're hearing over here. That for some reason, and that Judah doesn't know why, can't know why, but for some reason, Joseph does not want anybody to die. Because the brothers had said, listen, whoever took it will die, and we'll also be servants. No. Says the fellow. Whoever took it is the servant, and you'll be free. And Joseph says a similar thing. Only the one with whom it's been found shall be my servant, my eved. The rest of you can go in peace. So whatever it is, for some reason, Judah doesn't know, but probably notes it. This viceroy of Egypt doesn't want to kill us. He only wants to make us slaves. He wants to enslave, and not all of us. He wants to enslave this particular fellow. So this will be part of Judah's speech to Joseph, one of the great speeches. He's going to argue, step forward and argue for the freeing of Binyamin, and of course, offering to take his place. Now, before we continue, let's take comments or questions of what we have till now.
We have some great questions in the chat. Aviva says, the difference between Jacob's and the brothers' approach to taking responsibility points to a development from Jacob as a brother who cheated his only brother to his sons who, except for how they treated Joseph, take responsibility for one another. A progression from a lone individual to a family community and eventually a people.
That is a very good point. I want to just emphasize the last piece of that. Here's a very important point about the Joseph story. Without this, you can't fully grasp it. The way the book of Genesis works is it's part of the covenantal promise. When God speaks of 3 generations and a 4th generation, the 3 generations of suffering and the 4th generation shall return. So in other words, there's a difference between the 3 generations and the 4th. And the way the book works is that over the first 3 generations, let's say Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, one person is chosen. Avram had 2 brothers, but they're not covenantally chosen. Only Avram is chosen. Avram has 2 sons, Yitzchak and Yishmael, both blessed. But only Yitzchak gets the covenantal blessing, not Yishmael, right? So then you have Yaakov and Esav. Yaakov gets the covenantal blessing. Esav has great wealth, great power, does not get the covenantal blessing. So it's Abraham and not his brothers. It's Isaac and not Ishmael. It's Yaakov and not Esav. Now you come to the 4th generation. In the 4th generation, Jacob has made a vow to build the bayit, which means the inclusive structure. Jacob calls his family the bayit. And now the Chumash is wrestling with, we know the difficulties of succession, Isaac, Ishmael. We know Esav and Yaakov. And Yaakov has favored Yosef. But the point of the story, this is a critical point, is that it's not about Yosef or the other brothers. That wouldn't be Jacob's mission. Jacob's mission is everybody. It's got to be Joseph plus the brothers. That's the point over here. So one step towards Joseph plus the brothers is some sense on the part of the brothers that everybody's got to be included. In this particular case, it's Benjamin, who is set up as Joseph's proxy. Now, it's very interesting in Breshit. There were 6 brothers who don't play any role, individual roles in terms of the narrative. And there are 6 brothers who play important roles. There's Ruvain, there's Shimon, there's Levi, there's Yehuda, there's Yosef, and Binyamin. Those 6 are in the story. Those are central to the story. The difference is that Binyamin actually never talks. He never says a single word in the story. He's very important in the story, but he never says a word. But he's basically functions as the proxy of Joseph. When Judah says, no, we're all going to be slaves. And then he says later, take me instead of Benjamin. What the Chumash suggests is that Judah is someone who would have said, take me instead of Joseph. Because the same, Benjamin is also the favored one, the youngest one, the son of Rachel. So that's a very important step. When it comes to Yaakov and Esav, I think what Yaakov says is problematic. Rachel dies when he says that and all that. But it's still not the same thing because Yaakov and Esav can't actually, Yaakov is the one chosen from brother. So yes, Yaakov should have taken responsibility for the family. That's the problem there. But it's not, Yaakov and Esav can't be together. You can appease Esav with a gift, with a mincha. But you can't just appease Joseph with a mincha because you have to include Joseph. That's the theme of these chapters. Can we actually bring siblings together? Not simple. The first set of siblings was Cain and Hevel. That's a really important point. When the brothers say we are all servants, we're all avadim, that's a big step in the right direction. What else do you have in the chat there? Or what other questions?
We have a few questions from Jennifer. Jennifer, would you like to ask your questions?
Oh, sure. I'll just keep it to one. But thanks. So other people have. Is there a connection between the divination here, the silver goblet here, and Joseph's dreams as a child that his family will bow down to him?
I think there is that. I think there are two important connections here. One is, I said before, secret knowledge.
Yeah.
What Joseph is about, actually, the dreams are a very significant part of the Joseph narrative.
Mhm.
Dreams and interpreting dreams. You know something the other guy doesn't know.
Yeah.
And by the way, that's what infuriates the brothers. When Joseph's walking towards them, the dreamer is coming. When I say to you, I know something you don't know, and that is actually can be seen as a hostile statement. That's one connection. That's very important. The other thing is, there's another connection. There's one other person in this book who was a minachesh, a diviner, and that's Lavan. Lavan said to Jacob when he wants him, Nichashti, I am divine, and God has blessed me because of you. So the parallel between leaving the house of Joseph with the magic goblin and leaving the house of Lavan, the Menachesh, with the Trophim, it's a strengthening of the further link between these two stories. In other words, the point I was making is Joseph knows the people. That's why he's so dangerous. He knows about Benjamin's history. It's his own mother. He knows the story, presumably. So that's one thing. The other point I would make is a kind of literary point about the Joseph narrative, which is the Joseph narrative. When you read this long narrative, it feels totally different than the rest of Bereshit in several different ways. The speeches are much longer. There's much more psychology. You get a sense of Joseph as a conflicted person, the trappings of kingship. There's all kinds of things here. But what's amazing is how well integrated the story is into the rest of Genesis. It's integrated. This is one example, how it plays off the story of Lavan and the Trophim, etc. So at the same time, where it feels like a completely separate story, it is fully integrated literarily into the larger themes of Bereshit. That's the genius of it, actually. I mean, it's an amazing story, but that's part of it. What else? Any other questions here?
Laszlo was noting the connection between, I think this was verse 16 and Yom Kippur. I don't know if he wants to unmute and say more about this, but yeah.
That we repeat this phrase, Manit Tadok.
Yes, we do.
On Yom Kippur, when
we do.
Yes.
Yom Kippur is the day of confession. Obviously, it's one of the two main themes of Yom Kippur, one of the three main themes, the slichot, the penitential prayers, and the confessions. And my point about Judah's confession is what makes it such a powerful confession is that it actually is a confession about, he knows that they didn't, I presume he knows that it wasn't the stolen goblet. He's making a different point, which is the major point of the story, which is there's a problem that's not been dealt with properly throughout. Yes, the brothers said earlier, we're guilty for our brothers. We didn't hear our brothers' cries. There's a process taking place. But it's Yehuda who says, Umanitz Tadak, and who understands, presumably, that without confession, you can't get any place. And what he's really doing when he says Manitz Tadak, which we do say on Yom Kippur, he's actually repeating what his Rabbi taught him back in chapter 38, which is Tamar. Tamar taught him that the only way to bring a family, so it can be many. Tadak is Tzadi Dawid Korb. It's exactly the same shoresh. In the reflexive form, it gets the tet, but it's Tadak. Yeah. How can we justify ourselves? Which is what he said to Tamar in chapter 38, and he's about to say something else, which is about the Eravon, when he said to his father, Nochi Erevenu, which is to take responsibility, which is why at the end of the day, in terms of the kingship and the leadership of the brothers, it's going to be Judah. He already was in 38. We already Judah and Tamar, which is the pivotal story, because that's sort of the solution to the problem. In other words, how do you build a family? It's got to start with reality, with confession, etc. And they hangs on all the stories, the sale of Joseph, for sure.
One other point, Rabbi Silber, is in the beginning in Bereshit, when we are told of the birth of Hevel, Torah uses the word "v'toisef," indicating the rivalry or between the brothers as a theme that is going to come back, and the name, of course, Yosef.
For sure, I think the story of Cain and Hevel is a very important story because it's the first set of brothers. which doesn't end well. And the Chumash sort of is assuming that there's a natural rivalry. There are two brothers, there's one parent, which is, Adam or whatever, Adam and Eve. And so there's a sort of a natural rivalry. And in that case, also, God favors one over the other. God favored the sacrifice of Abel, and God did not favor the sacrifice of Cain, just as Jacob has favored Joseph and not the others. And he demonstrates it by giving him the coat, which was obviously a terrible mistake. So the stories are very similar. And the question is, can one overcome these natural enmities, natural rivalries to build a family? That's the challenge.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you for that. Anybody else?
We have a question from Susan. If this is what Yehuda thinks, why would he think Benjamin should be included in the punishment?
Well, Benjamin is included for a different right. That's true. The point is, he's not, because the Gavil was found in Benjamin's sack. There's nothing you can do about that. As he says, Gam Hashem nimsa Gavil, he separates the two. We'll all be slaves, he says. But the one with whom the Gavil has been found, he doesn't protest his innocence. Not because he was involved in the sale of Joseph, which he was not, but because at the end of the day, for whatever reason, the Gavil is in his sack. He can't dispute that. There it is.
But if you were thinking about it as a punishment for selling Yosef, perhaps the Gavil should have been in, we don't know for sure which brother actually was the one who instigated or whatever, but maybe it should have been in a different, Yehuda's mind, maybe it should have been in a different sack.
True. What we have to say here, I think, is that they're two separate things. One is the sin of the brothers, not Binyamin. He wasn't involved in that, but the sin of the brothers. We all are avadim. The same as he's guilty of X, we're guilty of Y, but we're all equally guilty before God. He can't get Benjamin off the hook. First of all, he has no proof Benjamin did not take it, and as I pointed out, he might have taken it. His mother did. Now she had a reason for taking it. I believe it's a fertility god, but in any event, there's nothing you can say. You can't prove no. Joseph says yes. It's he says, she says, he says, and the he says is the viceroy of Egypt, and Yehuda is a foreigner buying food. He has no. I don't believe that he actually. And what's interesting, by the way, is to return to Susan's comment that when Judah argues, as he's about to argue in the great speech of Judah, Vayigash, what's curious is what he says and what he doesn't say. Here's what he never says to Joseph in a long speech. It begins with verse number 18, and it goes to verse 34. It's 16 verses. It's one of the longest speeches in the book. It might be the longest speech in the book. He never once suggests that Benjamin is actually innocent. Never. It's quite remarkable. It's a 16-verse argument. He never suggests he's innocent, ever. Because why not? Well, because you can't prove he's innocent. You don't know he's innocent. Probably is innocent. But because that's not going to work. The point of the speech, I'll give you another example of this. I just mentioned this the other day. I spoke to one of the synagogues here in Jerusalem. The story of Joseph, we discussed this earlier in Mrs. Potiphar, when Mrs. Potiphar propositions Joseph in chapter 39. And Joseph refuses. Vayima'im, he refuses. And he tells Mrs. Potiphar, and she talks to him every day. She's talking to him all the time, but he refuses. And he gives her reasons. He explains why. It's not just no. Maybe he shouldn't give reasons. Maybe sometimes it's better don't give reasons. But he gives reasons. He gives two reasons. He says, first of all, your husband has been very good to me. He's done so many good deeds for me. He's promoted me over and over again. I can't do this behind the guy's back. That's not right. He's been so good to me. And the second reason is, he says, he trusts me. He leaves me alone. He doesn't look after me. He trusts me totally, right? Well, your deity, my bapait. He doesn't know what I'm doing. The guy has trusted me. I don't betray a trust. That's what Joseph says. I don't get involved in adultery for two reasons. A, in this particular case, the guy was good to me. And B, I don't betray a trust. So I'm not doing it. He adds a third thing, will be a sin against God. What's interesting is in the Megillah, which we're about to read pretty soon, there's a story that's exactly parallel to that, and that's Haman. Mordechai refuses to bow down to Haman. And the language is the same. Though they speak to him every day, he refuses to do it. It's exactly parallel. What's interesting is that, as I pointed out, I think in the past, that in the Joseph story, in chapter 39, the key word is vayima'en. There's even a shalshelet on that word. Vayima'en, right? He says no, he refuses. Then he explains. Vayima'en, he refuses. In the Megillah, though, in the story of Mordechai not bowing down, and the people in the court say, why do you violate the king's command? He refuses to listen. But it doesn't say Vayima'en. It doesn't say. But the word Vayima'en does appear in the Megillah, but not in that story. It appears in chapter 1. Vatma'en hamalka Vashti. Vashti, the queen, refuses to go to the king's party. He's half drunk with the boys. She's not going there. He wants to show her off. He's not going. She's not going. They have Vatma'en. And the point I think that's important about the Megillah is this. In the Megillah, there's only one person who actually says to Achashverosh, I'm not going to do what you tell me to do. Maybe she said a bunch of other things too, but she says straight to his face or directly to him through other third parties, I'm not going. Vatma'en, I refuse to go. That's not true of Esther, and then it's not true of Mordechai. Esther never said to Achashverosh, you're a bad guy. Who's out to kill the Jews? Esther could have said, dummy, what do you think? It's you. It's your signature. What do you mean without to kill the Jews? No. Haman, the wicked Haman. Haman is wicked. But Haman has no power to kill anybody. He has to go to the king. If the king signs off on it, why does Esther never confront the king? She never confronts him. You know why? Because it doesn't do any good. She has one mission, save the Jews. That's her mission. And you have to play the games of Achashverosh in order to do that. In other words, you can make all kinds of statements, but if you have a goal and you have a goal you want to get to, when you deal with Achashverosh and in many other settings, you have to understand what's possible, what's not possible, what the guy will hear, etc. And that's what Esther does. I mentioned all this as a sort of an introduction to Judah's great speech. Judah never says to Yosef that Binyamin is innocent. You know something? I know this kid. Since he's a baby, he doesn't steal things. He doesn't take stuff. He never says that. Actually, none, because that's not the argument over here. It's not going to work. But Judah has a different plan, and the plan is based on what he knows of Joseph through what we've read so far. He's going to take what he knows of Joseph, and he's going to try to use that to his advantage in terms of convincing Joseph to let Binyamin go and to take Judah in the place of Binyamin. So that's part of the genius of Judah's speech and part of leadership, I guess, to figure out what you say, to whom you say it, how you say it, etc. And the bottom line is Benjamin, if they go back home, I mean, Yaakov will probably die. He'll be heartbroken, certainly. And Judah has also taken the responsibility. So that's by way of introduction to Vayigash, which we'll start now. We have a few minutes still, so let's start with Vayigash. Judah has spoken to now. Joseph says,
"Can I just mention one thing?
Yes, sure.
Is it possible that this is that the beginning of Judah's speech is the answer to the Chalom of Yosef? The Chalom of Yosef is Mishtachavim Li. It's the concept of bowing down to me, or that one person will become the king, as opposed to whether it's the Bayit or whether the king is, because he's saying here, Ha'elohim matzah et avon avadecha, and is he somehow or other hinting at Avadim la'Adonai, not just la'Adoni? In some way, he's recognizing from within that this a fatal flaw in the family is that one person is the one for whom gets picked out, and that we serve God, not a person.
Okay, let me pick up on Chaim's point. I actually, as Chaim is speaking, he reminded me of, and it's related to what Chaim is saying. Here's what's interesting. When Joseph speaks several times in the narrative, several times, I can count them up, multiple times, When Joseph speaks, he puts it in terms of, we had dreams last night. What does Joseph say? Hello, Elohim Pitronim, Sapronoli. God interprets dreams. Tell me your dream. Pharaoh says to Joseph, I heard you interpret dreams. No. It's God who interprets dreams. But then he asks Joseph, and Joseph says, you better appoint someone very wise. Says Pharaoh, well, if God speaks to you, you are wiser. Joseph says to the brothers twice, listen, don't feel so bad you sent me down here. You didn't do it. God did it. God did it. Joseph sees himself on multiple occasions. I mentioned 5 just now, where he makes the point, yes, it's God who operates, but God operates through me. That's what Joseph is saying, actually. What's interesting about Yehuda is he never mentions God's name except once. There's only one in all of Judah's talk where he mentions God. It's right here. So actually it reinforces Chaim's point. Judah says, Manomar Adoni, Elohim Matzat Avon Avadecha. We were innocent in your eyes, guilty in your eyes, but we are guilty in God's eyes, which of course is true, referring to the sale of Joseph. And that's, I think, a very interesting point about Judah. It's striking with Yehuda that he never mentions God's name. That's not the kind of guy he is. He's very pragmatic, practical. He doesn't talk in these religious terms, actually. This is the only place that Yehuda mentions God's name. And it is striking, given the fact that constant reference to the word Ani. In fact, in the next section, beginning with Vayigash, you have Adoni 7 times, and you have Avodecha 13 times. And of the 13 times, 10 are the brothers, and 3 is Yaakov. We'll get to this. So he's very much understanding the situation. I am an Eved here in Egypt. This guy is the Adon. But then it is very striking when he says, Elohim matzat avon avadecha. What can I say to Adoni? That is, what's the point to tell you? Probably we didn't steal it, but we are guilty before God, is what he's saying. And that is actually a very interesting point over here, especially since he says it in no other place. He never mentioned, he had plenty of opportunity. Joseph does it all the time. That's how Joseph sees himself. So these are the two heroes, one might say, have a very different way of seeing themselves. At the end of the day, kingship will come from Judah and not from Joseph. Okay, let's at least begin now with, we have 2 minutes or so. Let's begin with the first verse. This is one of the great turning points, clearly. Vayigash Elav Yehuda. So now Judah steps forward. Vayigash Elav Yehuda. And next week we will spend the entire time in the speech. Vayomer bi Adonai, please, my Lord, Adonai. Yidaberna Abdecha Davar B'Yeznei Adonai Vayichra Abcha B'Avdecha Ki Kamocha Kifaro. So he begins over here by Joseph has given his decree. Joseph says, here it is. He's a slave. The rest of you can go in peace to your father's house. Awu b'shalom. But of course, Judah understands we can't go b'shalom to our father because our father says, and you'll be head down to the grave in sorrow. So Judah steps forward, which is not simple because he wasn't asked to step forward. He steps forward, I might say gingerly steps forward, and he makes it clear from the beginning. You are Paro, or you are Paro's level. You are the Adon. You are the servant. So please let me speak. Vayigash Elav Yehuda, he steps forward. Vayigash often means to step forward in a kind of gingerly way, respectful way, etc. And now, beginning in verse number 19, he will give his version of what has transpired over the last 2 chapters. We'll get to this next week, but I just want to point out, when I say his version, what we're looking for in this speech is 2 things. First of all, what he does say, and then what he doesn't say. He leaves certain things out. I mentioned before, one thing he doesn't say is he never pleads for the innocence of Binyamin. Never, that one suggestion that Binyamin didn't steal the goblet. Never. As a completely different argument, and we'll see this next week, but the argument is based on he's picked up something from the Joseph story. I mentioned one thing he's picked up. Joseph, for whatever reason, doesn't want anybody to die. That's clear. So when the brothers said, the one who took it should die, oh, no, the one who took it should be a servant, an Eved. It's on the level of Eved. It's not about dying. So that's one thing that Joseph, for whatever reason, doesn't want to do. And the second thing he notices, and I'll stop with this point, is for whatever reason, Joseph has some interest in our father, because he's asked more than once, how was your old father? Your old father, Hazaken, is he still alive? Is he still alive? Yes, he's still alive. So we'll pick this up next week. That's what Judah knows, based on what Joseph has said. Doesn't want to kill anybody, cares about the father. And Judah will use this in fashions the speech, which works actually. But in the process of the speech, we'll see many things about the speech. It's a very, very powerful speech. Maybe we'll have other things to say about it as well. So looking forward to next week.
Rabbi Silber, maybe you can answer this next time. What makes you think that his stepping forward was gingerly? He spoke in a gingerly way, but he was a man who, a masculine man, and he would be stepping up with.
But I'm picking up on the word vayigash. Often the word vayigash, as opposed to other verbs, are often when you have some hesitation. He has no hesitations, but I'm picking up on the word vayigash, how it's typically used in the Torah. We have to check the other cases. You have to look at it's based on that. Yeah.
All right. Thanks.
Okay. We'll pick up next week with the story.
Thank you, Rabbi. I have to run, but I wanted to say thank you before I just drop off.
Okay. You're welcome.
See you next time.
Thank you.
We're hooked.
All right. Bye-bye.
Rabbi, if people have more questions, where can they email you?
Yes, dsilber@drisha.org.
Okay.
I'm on a plane tomorrow from Israel to the States, so I'll be most of the day. Won't be. Tuesday I should get these stuff.
Okay, great.
Flying out. I'll be in transit all day tomorrow.
Okay, great. So that is for Charlotte.
Yeah, dsilber@drisha.org. Yeah.
dsilber@drisha.org. Great. So thank you everyone for joining us and for your incredible questions. Thank you so much, Rabbi Silber, for that amazing class. We will see you all next week. If you want to see more of Drisha's fantastic offerings this month, including public lectures, private Talmud shares, and a Yiddish translation workshop, very exciting. You can learn more and register for those classes at drisha.org. See you next week.
Thank you.
You.
Safe travels.